Hello, and welcome to the Eastern European Records virtual meeting from the International Institute of Genealogical Studies. Tonight's topic is calling Count Dracula using Eastern European phone and city directories for genealogical research. And if you'd like to learn more about the Eastern European Records Program or the International Institute of Genealogical Studies, you can find us at genealogicalstudies.com. So tonight we're going to be using the Library of Congress research guides. Now, the Library of Congress has more than 1,909 research guides in 84 subject categories. So there is one that is genealogy, which has 91 subcategories. But to use the guides about address and telephone directories, I went to East European Studies. There's 134 subcategories. And for each country in Eastern Europe, you see, for example, Albania address and telephone directories, Romania address and telephone directories, Hungary address and telephone directories. It's at this site, so you can go into the collections that way. Now, for the former Soviet Union, Russian Empire, they do have the former countries listed separately. For example, Latvia address and telephone directories, Lithuania address and telephone directories. However, earlier Russian Empire directories can be found in the Russian telephone and city directories from when these countries were not independent countries. And I'm going to show you some of that. Now, the Russian collection is called Russian telephone and city directories. So that's what we're going to be using. The collection was created on July 28th, 2022. So this is what it looks like. If you're going to be researching the collection, I suggest you read the introduction to get really an understanding of what's available and what's in the catalog, things like that. But I'm just going to go over a few quick things. Current telephone and yellow page directories are not cataloged in the online catalog. So that's why they created this guide to Russian Federation directories, Russian parts of the former Soviet Union, and some diaspora titles. It has over 1,300 entries in the catalog for Eastern Europe, and these directories help historians, biographers, genealogists, because they show residences, some cases years of residence, sometimes professions or trades. Now, modern directories have largely ceased to be printed or they're very hard to acquire. So the most recent Russian directory in the collection is 2014. And coverage varies by region, with some district level directories available and large cities less than small towns. But I did find some small towns, which we'll talk about later. So the purpose of this presentation is two things. It's using city directories and phone books for genealogy, but one goal is to, when you use these collections, is to get historical information about our ancestors and how they lived. And another goal is finding family branches who may have left Eastern Europe later than your family, or may even still be in Eastern Europe. However, because as it said, that the last directory is 2014, a way to find family currently in Eastern Europe is on the bottom of the guide on the introduction page. It lists Infobel. Infobel is an online telephone directory for all of Europe. And while they don't have private individuals at the site, they do have businesses. So that's a way to find family now. Another way to do it, and I'll show you an example later, is you can Google online telephone directory or people finders or white pages with the name of the country, and that will give you a database where you can look up people's phone numbers. So another thing to keep in mind when you're doing this research is telephones in the Iron Curtain. because I found this article from UPI 1988 that 13 million Soviets were still waiting for phones. Only 21% of homes in the Soviet Union had telephones. It's less than 10%. The national waiting list was 13 million people. So Moscow had 84% of its 9 million residents with telephones. But even in the Baltics, there was only 50 Baltic republics, there was only 50% of homes with telephones. So really, you just have to keep in mind when you're doing this research, if you're looking for family, if you don't see them in the book, it may not mean they didn't live in the town anymore. It may just mean they didn't have a telephone. So when you're looking at the introduction page of the guides to Russian city directories, it talks about some resources outside the Library of Congress catalog, and I'm going to show you some of them. But now, what's interesting about this, the State Public Historical Library in Moscow has digitized over 200 early address and telephone directories, and it talks about what it has in the collection: Adres Kalendari, Pamyatnia и Spravochnaya Knigi, and I'm going to go over these, what they are. Now, the State Public Historical Library, and we're going to be using that collection, has Pamyatnia Knizhki, which is something else which may have organizations, officials, but don't have directory content. We're going to talk more about those in a second. And the Russian State Library, they have also additional resources. So just to go a little deeper dive about the books you're going to find, Pamyatnia Knizhki, they are provincial yearbooks for Gubernia Oblast. Gubernia and Oblast, they are the gubernias during the Russian Empire, and oblasts later are like large designations, almost like states in the different republics. So the yearbooks, they had a calendar, they had the local administrative directory, they have statistical and economic overviews. They'll talk about institutions and notable residents. So they're very, very useful for history and genealogy. And I'm going to show you one. Now, the Adres Calendari, they are official directories. They had lists of government ministries, military units, churches, and schools. They're kind of like yearbooks of the state used for officials, merchants, and travelers. And the Pamyatnia и Spravochnaya Knigi, that is everything, the commemorative and reference volumes. And there's also Jubilee books that mark the anniversaries of institutions. So those are very good if you know your family was affiliated with a school or university. Those books exist. And practical handbooks are different handbooks that have like listings of these books. So I want to just show you the Pamyatnia Knizhki. So these were, as I mentioned, provincial yearbooks for a specific place. So if you go to the National Library of Russia, the collection is, if this translates as, commemorative books of the gubernia and the oblasti of the Russian Imperial Empire from 1833 to 1917. So you can click on the books and see what they have for your area, but also you can put into the search bar. Now, I put in Tarascha, which is a small town outside Kiev. And what I got, which was very handy, was I got the book for the Adres Kalendari for the Kiev gubernia. I didn't have to look up to see what gubernia Tarascha was in. So this is the screen that I got. You click on Chitat, which means read, and you get the book. Now, on the side of the book, you see here, this is a search bar. Naiti means search. So I knew that my family were blacksmiths. So first I typed in the word Kuznets, blacksmith, and I didn't get anything. But then I typed in the word Kanyushnaya, which is a horse stable, and indeed I got the name of a horse stable. I was able to put it in black so it was easier to read, but you can also cut and paste this into AI like ChatGPT, it'll translate it. And this was a horse stud farm that sold horses, most likely to blacksmiths, and it gave the name of the owner. So by doing this, it could be very possibly be the stable where my ancestors bought their horses from. So it's very much a way to understand the way your ancestors lived. If they had a larger business, their name might be even in here, because as you can see, it gives the name Anton Alexandrovich. It gives his name and his also it gives his surname, which is a little bit hard to read. And so it does give some individual people. Now, going back to the Russian telephone and city directories, I first clicked Moscow directories. Now, what it says, over 150 directories for the city of Moscow are detailed below. Now, it says they may or may not contain listings for the surrounding Moscow oblast. In other words, in Russia, so Moscow was an oblast, almost like a state. It could be a smaller unit like a county and a city. So you have to keep that in mind when you're doing this research. So region, so if you're looking for the Moscow area, you might want to go to regional directories, but also there's organizational directories and residential, and some have both. So now Moscow directories, now not everything is online, but you can use this catalog to find out. Some of it is just at the Library of Congress physically. And you can also sometimes use the catalog to see where it may be in a location by you, looking at, for example, into WorldCat. Now, this collection from 1896 to 1936 of Vsia Moskva, which means all Moscow, is online. So I clicked on it, and it's really nice. This is, the Russian Historical Library. Now, what's really nice as you can see here that says Vsia Moskva, all Moscow. It started in 1875, but I believe that date is when it started. 1896 is from the collection of the Library of Congress. Now, you can go into the search bar here and put in a word and search the whole collection, which is very convenient. So I put in the last name Coggin, which is a common last name. We even have a Supreme Court Justice in the United States named Coggin. Now, this I used Google Translate. I clicked it and it translated it. And you can see I got listings the name Coggin in 14 books. Now, this was the 1924 book, and you could see here it says Secret Coggin SB. It gives their phone number, and you can see what their position was, Deputy People's Commissar Rakovsky. Now, secret is not KGB. For a second, I thought perhaps it's secretary. And you could see here all the different people named Kagan are given and the page. And as I got the name Kagan, I got 14 books. I must have gotten about a dozen hit in each book. So what you do is I clicked on page 93 to see more in depth. And what it does, again, I used Google Translate for this, but you can also cut and paste this into ChatGPT, and then it gives, a little bit more information about the name of the person and what they were doing. For example, Murzich, Assistant Department of General Military Education, because the Soviet society was always very, very bureaucratic. So while there may not be a phone book with your particular ancestor in it, you can still find the different people. And since everything was nationalized, like even pharmacies, if your ancestor was a pharmacist, you can find it in a book like this. So another way to search is to search per book. So you can click on, for example, this is the 1911 book, the 1912 book. You can click on it and search page by page. And as you can see, that gives you a tremendous amount of information about how people lived, things like that. So this is a very wonderful rabbit hole to fall down. Now, as far as regional directories, under regional directories, I only found directories are what are currently in Russia. The other places that were formerly part of the Soviet Union are not in the regional directories listing. Now, I wanted to check Belarus to see, and I wanted to check the city of Minsk. Now, I went to Belarus address and telephone directories. Now, there was nothing online that they did have Minsk from 1955 to 1966. So if I could go to the Library of Congress to look it up, or I could cut and paste the names into something like WorldCat to see if they're at a library near me. However, I was curious to see if there would be Belarus information earlier when it was part of the Russian Empire in older directories. So I went to the State Public Historical Library collection. I remember that was on the first page at the bottom, and I clicked on the directories. And I did find here, I put the word Minsk into the search box. I did try certain last names in Minsk that I was researching, and I didn't get any hits. But as I said, so I put in the city of Minsk. And what happened, and I recommend when you're using the search bars to use Cyrillic characters, you could use Google Translate, you could ask ChatGPT, because when I tried to search with Latin characters, I didn't get any hits. Now, you can see in the whole collection of the Address Calendari, there's more than 251, which is a significant amount. So, but for Minsk, I got 4 hits. And what was interesting, all of Minsk in your pocket, it was apparently a guidebook. These are translated from Russian. List of populated places of Minsk in 1909, all of Belarus, a handbook of reference, and address and relevance book and calendar Minsk, 1923 to 1926. So again, these are wonderful resources to see how people live. Now, I did look at address and reference book calendar Minsk, and this is what I got. So you can search it page by page, and this is the table of contents. What they have, chronology of most important revolutionary events in Soviet Russia, the government institutions, they have press, newspapers, the higher education institutions. So if you know that your family was a certain age, they may have gone to this educational institution, and that could be a springboard for research to find if that institution has a yearbook or something else. You could perhaps find Library of Congress or someplace else. It also lists streets in Minsk, so if you have an address for your family, it can help you find where they were located. So this is what one of these booklets has, even if it doesn't have the name of your specific family. So I wanted to do a dive for actual family. So I went to the Ukraine address and telephone directories, and I clicked list of directories, and it gives you all the directories it has. So I was looking for outside of Kiev, where my family is from, and I only had checked 3 books. I checked one town in the area called Belaya Tserkov. I didn't find my family listed, even though I know they lived there in these later times. They probably didn't have a telephone. And then I looked at the books Stavishcha, one from 1970 and one from 1989, though that's the town 2 of my great-grandfathers were born in. And I did find a relative. And what was interesting, this family connection I had already researched and found through another way, but it is definitely a way to find family who have left later or may even still be in someplace in Eastern Europe. And what it gives you, as I said, the Stavischa 1989 book, I just wanted to show you some sample entries. It gives you the last name. For example, this is Storchak. It gives you the first two initials. Now, the second initial is the patronymic, so it can give you a hint at the person's father's name. And by looking to see how many people with the same name are still in the community, you can get a sense for how many families that you're seeking are still in the community. And also, because it's Russian, this is also very helpful. This last name is Strasievska. So it's a ka at the end. So it's a female it's a female declined surname. So you know it's a woman. And this gives you the name of the street they lived on and their address. Now you have to be careful because this street is called Komsomolska, which was the Soviet youth movement. And most of these kind of streets in former republics, the names have been changed. So if you're going to send a letter, you may have to do a little bit of work with a map or gazetteer to find out what the current name of the street is, or you could just write on the letter formally. Now, these are the phone numbers. As you can see, they're 5-digit phone numbers. So I did want to see if it's possible to convert these numbers into modern numbers. So I asked ChatGPT, and it gave me a very long explanation, which I asked it to summarize, but it explained that the 5 numbers were for smaller towns or districts. After the USSR collapsed, each country adopted new area code and local numbers. So to convert an old 5-digit number to a modern one, you need to know the city region, the new area code, and the prefix change. So that's something you can actually do with ChatGPT or AI to convert the number to a possible modern number. And another thing you can do is that this gives you the beginning to look for research. So for example, this is a Russian white pages that's online, and we have the last name and the first initial from these um, kind of listings in the phone book, and you could put in the city to see if they have a current name and address. So really, the city directories and phone books do meet the goal we talked about. It can give us incredible historic information about our ancestors, and finding family branches who may have left Eastern Europe later or still be in Eastern Europe, it gives you this information. And now you're probably asking, what about Dracula? So I went to Romania address and telephone directories, and I found this. This is on the Library of Congress webpage for the Romanian city directories and telephone directories. On the bottom, it's Arcanum Digiteca. It's a database of Romanian English search interfaces, and it has full text search option. It has phone numbers from 1913 Hungarian Kingdom, which then included Transylvania, and it gives 2 examples you can check out. Now, this database is a paid database from the Eastern European Newspaper Archive, which is a wonderful database. And you could see here the thumbnails. So this really is, if you were looking for some Dracula's phone number, you could find it. Now, I did also want to see on the bottom, it gave, freely available online directories on the page, and it gave the Romanian yellow pages, and it also gave Infobel. So I typed into Infobel Dracula, and I found the Dracula Vampire Company in Bucharest. So again, in addition to the Library of Congress resources, on the web page, what's so great about these research directories, you click on a link and it brings you right to the Eastern European Archive that has the guide, and if it's been digitized, you can see it that way without having to go through the National Library or whatever state library it's in. And also on the bottom of the guides, it lists other resources to help you find current businesses and people in Eastern Europe. So I really think that the Library of Congress guides are a tremendous a- asset to do research in Eastern Europe for your family and the way they lived. So I would be very happy to take any questions at this time. I'd like to thank you for attending today's lecture from the International Institute of Genealogical Studies. And you can find us at genealogicalstudies.com. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be very happy to take them. And I'm also going to now shut off the recording in case people would like to ask questions not online. Okay, thank you very much for attending today's lecture, and I very much hope you'll check us out at genealogicalstudies.com.